What if the person you thought was your best friend, your confidant, your sister in spirit, was only ever using you? What if every brunch, every whispered secret, every shared laugh was part of a bigger calculation? That's the chilling allegation now being spoken aloud about Meghan Markle by the woman who once stood by her side at every milestone. Jessica Mulroney. Betrayal cuts deeper when it comes from someone you believed was family. And in this story, that knife isn't just sharp, it's twisted. From the outside, Meghan's life looked like a fairy tale. A successful actress on a hit show. A glamorous Toronto lifestyle filled with charity events, fashion, and friends. But behind the polished Instagram feed, Jessica now suggests there was a cold truth. Meghan was climbing, one rung at a time, and when she reached the top, she looked back at those who helped her, only to push them aside. Think about that for a second. How many people do you know who rise to fame, fortune, or power and suddenly forget the ones who were there at the start? Does it feel like loyalty, or does it feel like strategy? Before we continue, please hit the like button, subscribe to the channel, and turn on the notification bell for updates. Let's rewind. Meghan wasn't always walking red carpets beside royalty. She wasn't born into aristocracy. Her entrance into elite circles came through careful introductions, friendships, and, most significantly, Jessica Mulroney. Jessica wasn't just a friend. She was Meghan's passport into Canada's elite. Her family name carried weight. Her connections opened doors in fashion, in media, in politics. Jessica's husband, Ben Mulroney, was one of the most recognizable faces in Canadian television. Her father-in-law, former Canadian Prime Minister Brian Mulroney. That's the kind of access Meghan couldn't buy, no matter how charming she appeared on screen. Now here's where it gets interesting. Meghan knew this. She leaned into it, and Jessica welcomed her with open arms. The two were inseparable, brunching, shopping, attending galas. Meghan became a fixture in Jessica's world. And when Meghan needed help styling herself to match the polished sophistication of her new social circle, who stepped in? Jessica. When Meghan wanted access to Canadian designers, whose name carried the weight to make those collaborations happen, Jessica's. It was a friendship forged in glamour. But underneath, was it also a transaction? Think about the optics. Meghan, a biracial American actress, finding herself suddenly not just in Canadian high society, but elevated to the front row of fashion weeks, featured in media profiles that painted her as more than just Rachel Zane from Suits. Overnight, she wasn't just an actress. She was one to watch. That transformation wasn't accidental, and it wasn't free. It came through the doors Jessica held open. But here's where betrayal creeps in. Because as quickly as Meghan walked through those doors, Jessica insists, she slammed them shut behind her. The friendship was useful until it wasn't. Pause here and really let that sink in. Have you ever had a friend who suddenly stopped answering calls, stopped including you, stopped showing up, right after they got a new job, a new partner, or a new circle? It stings. But imagine that on a global scale. One day, you're the best friend, helping plan outfits, managing appearances, even rumored to whisper advice about Meghan's romance with a British prince. The next, you're cut off, because now Meghan doesn't need the access you once provided. It's a story as old as ambition. But it's different here. Why? Because Meghan wasn't climbing to a promotion or a new city. She was climbing into the British royal family. A world where optics mean everything. A world where old friendships can be liabilities. And a world where one woman's silence could shield or expose secrets. Jessica now claims that once Meghan secured her royal platform, she simply vanished. The text slowed down. The calls stopped. Jessica, who once thought of Meghan as a sister, was left in the cold. Publicly, Meghan crafted her new narrative. The outsider who had found love with a prince, stepping into the world stage. Privately, Jessica realized she had been written out of the script. But here's the twist. It wasn't just a quiet fade out. No, Jessica says it was brutal. Erasure. Meghan didn't just step back. She cut her off entirely. No acknowledgement of the years of support. No loyalty for the doors opened. Instead, silence. And this is where the heartbreak turns to fire. Because Jessica doesn't mince words. She accuses Meghan of using her, discarding her, and rewriting history without her in it. She didn't need me anymore, so I was erased. Think about the coldness of that line. Erased. Not forgotten. Not distanced. Erased. It implies intention, deliberate removal, as if Jessica's presence in Meghan's story was inconvenient once the royal chapter began. And now, Jessica is speaking, and her words don't just tarnish Meghan's image. They cut right at the heart of how Meghan built her entire persona. Was she really the compassionate, loyal friend she presented to the world? Or was every move a carefully calculated step upward, no matter who got left behind? This is why it matters now. Meghan's brand, her entire image as a humanitarian, a champion of women, a speaker of truth, relies on the idea that she values connection, loyalty, and authenticity. But Jessica's accusations rip that image apart. Because if Meghan can so easily discard her closest friend, what does that say about the rest of her relationships? With staff, with family, even with the royal family itself. And this story doesn't exist in a vacuum. We've seen others come forward, quietly or loudly, saying similar things. That Meghan draws people in, uses what she needs, and when their usefulness ends, so does the relationship. Jessica's voice doesn't just add to that narrative, it amplifies it. Because she wasn't just some friend from school. She was instrumental. She was crucial. Without Jessica, Meghan's climb to the world stage might have looked very, very different. So where does this leave us? With questions. Did Meghan ever truly care for Jessica? Or was she simply a stepping stone? Did she ever see the friendship as mutual, or only as a ladder? And most importantly, if Jessica is telling the truth, what does this mean for Meghan's legacy moving forward? Because here's the chilling reality. Meghan has built a brand on loyalty, compassion, and being real. But what if behind that glossy veneer, the truth is colder? What if the woman who preaches empowerment was simply practicing exploitation? And the timing? Oh, the timing. Jessica's revelations don't just land quietly. They arrive as Meghan faces mounting scrutiny, public opinion shifting, questions rising, a Hollywood dream that may not be as unshakable as it once seemed. Jessica's voice doesn't just sting, it undermines. But what happens when someone who knows the private Meghan, the unfiltered Meghan, begins to open up? When the confidant of her past lifts the curtain, that's when the entire story changes. Because this isn't just about a friendship gone sour. It's about who Meghan really is when the cameras are off. It's about the difference between the persona she sells and the person behind the scenes. And Jessica's story may just be the key that unlocks the truth. And what comes next could shake not just Meghan's image, but the very narrative she's fought so hard to control. She wasn't just a friend. She was the launchpad. Jessica Mulroney didn't realize it at the time, but every brunch, every charity gala, every carefully styled Instagram photo was part of a larger story, one where Meghan Markle was the star and Jessica was just the supporting role. Or at least, that's how it looks now. It started so simply. Two women with energy, ambition, and style. Toronto was the backdrop, Suits was Meghan's ticket, and Jessica was the insider with all the connections. The city's social scene may not have the glitter of Hollywood, but in Canada, Jessica's last name meant influence. She wasn't just the daughter-in-law of a former prime minister. She was a brand. She had her own standing in fashion, lifestyle, and media circles. To be seen with her was to be validated. And Meghan knew it. Think about it. Meghan had been acting for years, but Suits gave her a stable platform, not international fame. She was successful, yes, but not celebrated. There's a difference. She had visibility, but not power. Jessica had what Meghan needed, doors that could open to power. Their friendship began naturally, at least on the surface. Both women loved fashion, loved the spotlight, loved the rhythm of social events. They bonded over children's playdates, over shared ambitions, over their mutual desire to be seen as more than wives or actresses. They were women who wanted influence. But here's the question, was it friendship or strategy? Jessica invited Meghan into her world. Suddenly Meghan was no longer just the actress from the USA Network. She was sitting front row at Toronto Fashion Week. She was being styled by Jessica for appearances. She was being featured in Canadian lifestyle spreads that made her look like more than a TV actress. She was framed as a future icon. This was not an accident. It was design. And who benefited? Meghan. She gained visibility, credibility, a new polish to her image. Jessica's introductions gave her access to powerful people, designers, editors, social elites. Every handshake pushed Meghan closer to the world she wanted, one of influence and admiration. Let's pause. Have you ever met someone who seemed to slip so easily into your life, like they'd always been there, only later to realize they were carefully positioning themselves? That's what makes this story sting. Because in hindsight, every move Meghan made looks calculated. Jessica wasn't just a friend, she was a tool, a ladder, and Meghan was climbing. Take the fashion endorsements. Meghan's style transformation didn't just happen. She had Jessica's guidance, her connections to designers, her ability to secure looks that would place Meghan in the glossy pages. Before Harry, Meghan was already being positioned as a woman of taste and status. That wasn't accidental. Jessica made it happen. The irony? The world saw Meghan's image and believed it was all organic, that she was this effortlessly chic, self-made woman. But insiders whisper that Jessica was the invisible hand, the stylist, the connector, the force who helped Meghan build a reputation that looked bigger than her career at the time. And when Meghan and Harry's paths crossed, all of this mattered. Harry wasn't meeting just an actress. He was meeting a woman with a carefully curated image of sophistication, philanthropy, and elite connections. Without Jessica, would Harry have seen Meghan in the same light? Would she have seemed as ready for his world? That's the uncomfortable question. Jessica thought she was helping a best friend. She was elevating someone she believed in. Meghan thought she was building a future. And she was, but the foundation was laid with Jessica's bricks. Now imagine this. Jessica didn't just stand by Meghan. She was actively involved in some of the most pivotal moments. When Meghan's romance with Harry became serious, Jessica was there, styling her, helping her navigate the new glare of attention. Meghan leaned on Jessica for advice, for strategy, for execution. Jessica's fingerprints were all over Meghan's transformation from TV actress to royal fiancée. The bond looked unbreakable. The photos, the appearances, the constant presence, it all screamed best friends forever. But beneath the smiles, Jessica didn't know she was being written out of the story even as she was helping write it. Think of the irony. Jessica, who was helping Meghan look like a queen in waiting, would soon be erased the moment the crown's glow landed on Meghan's head. This isn't just about a falling out. It's about betrayal disguised as friendship. Meghan didn't slam doors in Jessica's face while she was climbing. She let Jessica hold them open. And once she was through, the doors closed permanently. But here's where the tension builds. Because at the height of their closeness, Meghan gave every sign of loyalty. She posted about Jessica. She involved her in royal preparations. She positioned her as a sister figure. Jessica had every reason to believe this was lifelong. And yet, the signs were there. Meghan's history shows a pattern. Friends who drift away. Relationships that fade. People who are useful until they aren't. Jessica wasn't the first, but she may have been the most important. Which brings us to the chilling moment. Jessica didn't just lose a friend. She lost her place in history. Imagine being at the center of someone's rise to global fame, only to be erased from their narrative once they arrive. Meghan's silence on Jessica isn't just absence, it's strategy. Because to acknowledge her would be to admit how much she owed. And that's the wound Jessica now exposes. This is only the beginning. Because if Meghan could discard Jessica at the peak of their friendship, what did that say about what came next? What did that say about how she'd handle the royal stage? The friendship that once looked like sisterhood was, in Jessica's words, nothing more than a transaction. And the worst part? She didn't see it until it was too late. But what came next would change everything, and no one saw it coming. She knew exactly what she was doing. That's the accusation now echoing through whispers in Toronto, through former friends, and through Jessica Mulroney's own voice. Meghan Markle wasn't just navigating a social scene, she was climbing it. And not carefully, not quietly, but strategically, one rung at a time, until she reached the very top. The question is, who got stepped on along the way? Let's talk about social climbing in plain sight. Toronto isn't Hollywood. It's not London. It's a smaller pond, but with its own glittering ecosystem of elites, politicians, designers, media moguls, and old money families. And Meghan? She wanted in. She had tasted the edges of fame through Suits. She had a steady career, but she wasn't a star. To break through, she needed access to circles where people with real influence moved. Jessica gave her that. And once she had it, Meghan didn't hesitate to use it. Think of the invitations. Suddenly Meghan wasn't just attending wrap parties for television. She was rubbing shoulders with Canadian fashion powerhouses, attending high society galas, becoming a regular face in the company of women who dominated the lifestyle magazines. This wasn't chance. Jessica was the gatekeeper, and Meghan walked right through every gate. But here's where it gets fascinating. Meghan didn't just join Jessica's circle. She began reshaping herself to fit into it. Notice the transformation. Her wardrobe evolved. Her Instagram curated to look less TV actress and more global influencer. She leaned into causes that resonated with elites: charity work, humanitarian branding, women's empowerment. Was this heartfelt? Or was it strategic alignment to the values admired by the people she needed approval from? Let's ask the audience directly. When you see someone suddenly shifting their entire persona to match their new crowd, do you believe it's growth or performance? The irony is, Meghan played it well. She didn't come across as a desperate outsider clawing for attention. She projected warmth, relatability, and charm. That's the genius of her climb. It didn't look like a climb at all. It looked like a woman naturally blossoming in the spotlight. But behind the curtain, Jessica was engineering introductions, arranging stylist connections, making sure Meghan was noticed by the right people at the right time. Fashion is a perfect example. Meghan became known for her style long before she became royal. Canadian designers dressed her, and suddenly magazines were covering her look. She wasn't just another actress. She was a trendsetter. That doesn't happen by accident. It happens because someone with clout picks up the phone and says, "Dress her. She's going places." And who made those calls? Jessica. But here's the sting. Once Meghan had been established as a style icon, once she was on the radar of international outlets, Jessica's role became less visible. Meghan was being praised for her natural elegance, for her effortless taste. Rarely did people mention the woman behind it all. Meghan never corrected the narrative. She let people believe it was all her own doing. That's where the betrayal deepens. Because Jessica wasn't just a stepping stone, she was erased from the equation even before the fallout. Now, let's consider the timeline. Meghan meets Prince Harry in 2016. By then, she was already positioned as more than just a TV actress. She had the sheen of someone who could plausibly fit into royal circles. Coincidence? Or design? Many argue Meghan curated herself into someone who would not only catch Harry's eye, but also survive the brutal test of royal optics. Would Harry have introduced just any actress to his inner circle? Or was Meghan already polished enough, thanks to Jessica's help, to appear as a respectable, fashionable, humanitarian woman? And here's the contradiction. Meghan often speaks of being self-made, of pulling herself up without shortcuts, of carving her own path. But the receipts suggest otherwise. Jessica's hand was everywhere in her rise. That's not self-made. That's assisted ascent. Still, Meghan was clever. She didn't cling too tightly to Jessica's identity. She absorbed what she needed, then began projecting it as her own. Social climbing isn't just about who you know. It's about making their influence indistinguishable from your persona. Meghan mastered this. But let's not ignore the personal cost. Social climbing may look glamorous, but it leaves wreckage. Friends who feel used. Connections that sour when they realize they were leveraged, not loved. And Jessica's testimony makes it clear. She believes she was one of those casualties. The irony is sharp. Meghan, the woman who preaches empowerment, loyalty, and authenticity, is now accused of being the exact opposite in her closest friendships. Using people as tools, discarding them when no longer useful, and presenting herself as the architect of her own success. And yet, the climb worked. Meghan reached heights unimaginable for a Canadian actress. She didn't just become a household name. She became royalty. And the people who helped her along the way, many of them were left behind, their roles in her story erased. But here's where the tension spikes. Jessica thought she was indispensable. She thought her role in Meghan's rise guaranteed her a permanent place in Meghan's life. That's why the silence that came later was so brutal. Jessica wasn't just forgotten. She was cut out. And that's where we see the cold strategy. Meghan didn't just climb. She climbed without looking back. Which leaves us with a chilling question. If Meghan could treat Jessica this way, what does that say about every other relationship in her life? Staff, aides, even members of the royal family. Is the pattern of use and discard the hidden truth behind Meghan Markle's story? Because what came next would show that Meghan's climb didn't stop when she reached Canadian elites. No, Her eyes were already on a much bigger prize. And Jessica was about to find out just how expendable she really was. She wanted more. That much was clear. Meghan Markle wasn't going to stop at Toronto's high society luncheons or the glossy front pages of Canadian lifestyle magazines. No, her eyes were fixed on something grander, shinier, untouchable. And then it happened. She crossed paths with a prince. Prince Harry. The opportunity of a lifetime. But here's the question. Was it love at first sight, or the ultimate jackpot in Meghan's climb? By the time Meghan met Harry in 2016, she was no longer the actress living in quiet anonymity. Thanks to Jessica Mulroney's influence, she had polished herself into someone who looked like she belonged in royal company. She wasn't just Rachel Zane from Suits. She was a global humanitarian, a fashion icon, a woman photographed at elite events. That image mattered. Because for Harry, who lived under constant scrutiny, perception was everything. Would he really have risked introducing a girlfriend who looked like she couldn't handle the spotlight? Or did Meghan appear ready because she had already been dressed, coached, and elevated into the role by her closest ally? Think about it. Jessica wasn't just a friend cheering Meghan on. She was an architect in the shadows. Reports swirl that Jessica helped Meghan select outfits that screamed sophistication before royal meetings. That she advised her on how to present herself with just the right balance of modern confidence and traditional elegance. That she whispered strategies on how to impress, not just Harry, but the entire royal machine that came with him. And it worked. Meghan charmed. Harry fell head over heels. Within months, the relationship was the talk of the globe. And suddenly, Meghan's climb leapt from Toronto society to Buckingham Palace's gates. But where was Jessica in this whirlwind? Right by Meghan's side. In fact, insiders suggest she played a role in orchestrating Meghan's royal transformation. From wardrobe consultations to wedding planning whispers, Jessica's fingerprints were everywhere. She was even seen as the de facto stylist during Meghan's engagement period, ensuring Meghan's new image resonated with both the press and the palace. Now here's the irony. Jessica, the friend who once opened doors to fashion designers and socialites, was now indirectly opening the door to the monarchy itself. She gave Meghan the credibility and polish to be seen as royal-ready. Meghan was no longer just an actress in love. She was being received as a woman who could step into one of the most scrutinized families on earth. And yet, Jessica didn't realize it at the time, but this was the beginning of her own erasure. Because once Meghan stepped into Harry's world, everything changed. The hierarchy of importance shifted. Jessica, once at the top of Meghan's inner circle, suddenly found herself in the background. Meghan had a new focus, a new power, a new identity. And Jessica's role? Slowly diminishing. But it wasn't obvious at first. Meghan made sure Jessica was still close during those critical moments. Remember the wedding in 2018? Jessica's children played starring roles as page boy and bridesmaids. Jessica herself was seen arriving at Windsor, glowing as if she were Meghan's true sister. The optics screamed loyalty, forever friendship, gratitude. But was that the reality? Or just another layer of performance? Because behind closed doors, Meghan was already pulling away. Jessica's role was transactional, helpful during the transition, but not essential once the royal glow had been secured. Meghan's new life in the palace came with its own advisors, its own stylists, its own power players. She didn't need Jessica's introductions anymore. Ask yourself, how often do we see people rise to a new level, only to abandon the ones who got them there? Is it ambition or betrayal? Jessica likely believed her closeness during the engagement and wedding solidified her place forever. After all, best friends don't just vanish after historic milestones. But that's exactly what happened. The text slowed. The call stopped. The Meghan who once needed Jessica's network now had her own. The friendship that had seemed unshakable was quietly dissolving. And the cruelest part? Meghan didn't say it outright. She didn't end the friendship with honesty. She simply faded, one unanswered message at a time. That silence was more brutal than words could have been. Because in Meghan's world, the climb didn't stop at royalty. She wanted global influence, Hollywood fame, control of her narrative. And Jessica was no longer part of that story. But the irony was sharp. The woman who styled Meghan into a duchess, who gave her the credibility to be seen as royal-ready, was now left watching from the sidelines as Meghan basked in the world stage. It was as if the ladder had been kicked away the second it served its purpose. And Jessica? She was left wondering how the woman she once considered family could be so cold, so strategic, so transactional. Yet this was only the beginning of the fracture. Because once Meghan had Harry, she didn't just abandon Jessica, she began erasing her. The narrative was rewritten. The stylists, the mentors, the connectors disappeared from Meghan's story. Suddenly, she was self-made again. The polished, elegant duchess who had blossomed entirely on her own. But the truth? Jessica's fingerprints were still there, invisible but undeniable. Meghan's climb into royalty would not have looked the same without her. And here's the cliffhanger. Meghan may have reached the crown's glow, but what she did next would reveal just how expendable her oldest allies really were. It starts with silence. Not an argument. Not a screaming match. Just silence. The kind of silence that creeps in slowly, text by text, call by call, until one day you realize you're no longer in their life at all. That's how Jessica Mulroney says Meghan Markle ended things. No explanation. No closure. Just a cold, calculated fade out once Meghan had everything she wanted. And that silence was deafening. Think about it. One day, Jessica was Meghan's rock, her closest confidant, her fixer, her stylist, her connector. The next, she was a ghost. Messages went unanswered. Invitations stopped. Meghan was too busy, too unavailable, too unreachable. But was it really busyness? Or was it intentional distance? Jessica noticed the signs. Meghan, once glued to her phone, was suddenly slow to respond. Meetings were postponed, then canceled. Plans that once filled their calendars evaporated into excuses. And Jessica, who had always been at the center of Meghan's world, found herself pushed further and further to the edges. It wasn't just about friendship. It was about loyalty. Jessica had given Meghan everything. Her name, her influence, her trust. But once Meghan secured her engagement, then her royal wedding, then her new life as the Duchess of Sussex, Jessica no longer fit. Ask yourself, why would Meghan, a woman who once clung to Jessica like a sister, suddenly cut her off? Was it embarrassment? Was it strategy? Or was it simply that Jessica had served her purpose? The irony is almost cruel. At the wedding, Jessica's children played roles so prominent they were splashed across headlines worldwide. Jessica herself looked radiant, seated with the confidence of someone who believed she was part of history forever. She thought she had secured her place as Meghan's lifelong best friend, cemented by royal photographs. But those images now looked bittersweet, almost haunting, because within months, Meghan had gone silent. It wasn't just silence in private, it was erasure in public. Meghan stopped posting about Jessica, stopped acknowledging her, stopped crediting her. The woman who had been a constant fixture in her rise was suddenly invisible. Meghan's new world, the palace, the press, the global stage, had no room for the friend who once held her hand through every fitting, every appearance, every carefully staged step. This wasn't an accident. Silence, after all, can be the loudest strategy. Meghan didn't need Jessica anymore. Worse, Jessica had become a liability. Why? Because Jessica knew too much. She had seen behind the curtain. She knew the strategies, the performances, the carefully orchestrated climb. And Meghan, stepping into the most scrutinized family on earth, couldn't risk someone like Jessica holding so many receipts. Silence wasn't just distance, it was self-preservation. But for Jessica, it was heartbreak. Imagine watching the person you loved like family ignore your calls. Imagine seeing them on the world stage, smiling with new allies, while you were left behind with unanswered messages. The pain wasn't just personal, it was public humiliation. And the whispers started. Insiders began to notice Jessica's absence. Paparazzi who once photographed the pair together asked, "Where is she? Why is Meghan suddenly so distant from the woman who was once her shadow?" The silence became a story in itself. And Jessica? She waited. At first, she thought it was a phase. That Meghan was busy adjusting to royal life. That the distance was temporary. But then weeks turned into months. Months into years. And Jessica realized the truth. She had been cut off. Coldly. Permanently. Here's where the betrayal cuts deep. Meghan didn't just leave a friendship behind. She left a family. Jessica's children, who had walked Meghan down the aisle as pageboy and bridesmaids, were forgotten. Her husband, once a close ally, was ignored. Meghan didn't just drop Jessica. She erased the entire Mulroney family from her world. And what's more, Meghan never looked back. No statement. No acknowledgement. No gratitude for years of loyalty. Just silence. Let me ask you, is silence kinder than confrontation, or is it cruelty dressed as avoidance? Jessica's pain wasn't just in the loss of a friend. It was in the realization that their bond had been transactional all along. That Meghan's affection was conditional. That the friendship was only as strong as Meghan's need for it. And that's when the truth began to settle like a stone in Jessica's chest. She had been used. She had been necessary until she wasn't. But Jessica's silence, too, couldn't last forever. Because what happens when someone who has been erased decides to speak? When the woman who opened the doors starts telling the world how Meghan shut them in her face? The answer would shake Meghan's carefully crafted image. And that reckoning began with the public fallout no one saw coming. Because what came next wasn't just silence anymore. It was scandal. And this time, the whole world was watching. It wasn't whispers anymore. It was headlines. Blazing, brutal headlines that spread like wildfire in the summer of 2020. Jessica Mulroney wasn't just quietly erased from Meghan Markle's life. She was publicly engulfed in scandal. And Meghan's silence in that moment told the world everything Jessica had been trying to deny to herself for years. Their friendship was dead. It all began with Instagram. A Canadian influencer named Sasha Exeter accused Jessica of using her privilege to intimidate her during the height of the Black Lives Matter movement. The story blew up overnight. Suddenly Jessica, the once beloved stylist and TV personality, was painted as tone-deaf, elitist, even racist. She lost television contracts, brand deals, her entire public standing. Within days, it was gone. But here's the twist. When the scandal broke, many assumed Meghan would step in. Meghan, who had built her post-royal brand on racial justice, activism, and standing up for women, surely wouldn't abandon her best friend in her darkest hour. Surely Meghan, who owed so much of her climb to Jessica, would defend her. But Meghan didn't. She didn't speak. She didn't post. She didn't call. Not publicly. Not privately. Nothing. The silence was louder than any condemnation could have been. Because Meghan's brand, her carefully polished image as a champion of equality, couldn't afford to be linked to Jessica's scandal. And so, the Duchess of Sussex let her sister burn. Think about the coldness of that move. Jessica had been there for Meghan through every transformation, every carefully orchestrated reinvention. She had styled her, elevated her, defended her. And when Jessica needed Meghan most, Meghan cut her loose. This was no coincidence. Meghan's team knew optics mattered. In California, she was crafting her narrative with Harry as global changemakers, building partnerships with Netflix and Spotify, speaking about systemic injustice. A friendship with Jessica, now branded as problematic, didn't fit. The solution? Distance. Public, permanent distance. Jessica, blindsided, reportedly begged Meghan to stand by her. She had believed their bond was unbreakable. But instead, Meghan's circle began briefing the press that Meghan had moved on from Jessica long before the scandal. That the two had been distant for years. That Meghan wasn't responsible for Jessica's downfall. Do you see the strategy here? Meghan didn't just stay silent. She rewrote the story to erase Jessica completely. Overnight, Jessica went from Meghan's closest confidant to a footnote. And it worked. The public narrative shifted. Jessica was left alone in the storm while Meghan emerged untouched, her image intact, her brand unsullied. But imagine the heartbreak for Jessica. She had stood by Meghan during her most vulnerable years in Canada. She had opened every door, given every resource, poured her loyalty into the friendship. And the moment she became a liability, Meghan didn't just step back. She slammed the door shut. Ask yourself, what kind of friend does that? Is it self-preservation, or is it betrayal at the deepest level? Because Jessica's scandal didn't just mark the end of a friendship, it revealed the truth of it. To Meghan, Jessica had never been a sister, never been family. She had been useful, a tool, a stepping stone. And once her usefulness ended, so did the friendship. The public fallout was devastating for Jessica. She lost her career, her reputation, her standing in the social world she once dominated. But the most painful loss wasn't professional, it was personal. She lost Meghan. Or maybe, more accurately, she realized she had never truly had her to begin with. And this is where the tragedy of the story becomes its sharpest irony. Meghan, the woman who presents herself as a loyal advocate for women, abandoned the one woman who had given her everything. Not with words, not with confrontation, with silence. Silence that screamed, "You're no longer useful to me." And for Jessica, that silence broke something inside her. Because if Meghan could discard her so easily, what did that say about the entire friendship? Had it ever been real? Or was it just a performance, scripted for Meghan's climb to the top? But here's where the story twists again. Because Jessica's silence didn't last, her heartbreak began to shift into something else, something sharper, louder, more dangerous for Meghan. Jessica began to speak, and what she revealed would rip open the polished image Meghan had spent years building. Because the truth was about to spill, and it was uglier than anyone expected. She kept the mask on for years. She smiled in photos, posed for the cameras, carried on as if nothing had changed. But behind the scenes, Jessica Mulroney was unraveling. When Meghan Markle's silence hit her hardest, when her so-called best friend refused to defend her, refused even to acknowledge her, Jessica didn't just lose a friend. She lost herself. This is the heartbreak chapter. Jessica had been a powerhouse in Canadian media, fashion expert, stylist to the stars, TV personality, a woman who walked into any room with confidence. But after the Instagram scandal and Meghan's erasure, Jessica's world came crashing down. Networks cut ties. Contracts vanished. The invitations stopped coming. Overnight, she was toxic. And the irony was cruel. The very same world she had ushered Meghan into now turned its back on her. The same fashion houses that once begged Jessica for collaborations now ghosted her. The same media outlets that once ran glowing profiles of her now painted her as disgraced. She was isolated. And where was Meghan? Silent. Absent. Gone. Pause here and imagine it. You've given your loyalty, your time, your resources, your name, only to be abandoned when the storm hits. Alone. Humiliated. That's the knife that cut Jessica the deepest. Jessica reportedly spiraled. She struggled with her mental health, her sense of self. Friends whispered that she felt betrayed, discarded, left for dead by the woman she had loved like a sister. The woman whose children she had welcomed into her home. The woman she had dressed, guided, defended. And the contrast? Meghan was thriving. Or at least, that's what it looked like. California mansions. Netflix deals. Paparazzi shots of her smiling, hand in hand with Harry, walking red carpets in designer gowns. Meghan's life glittered brighter than ever, while Jessica's crumbled into silence and obscurity. Do you see the cruelty? The imbalance? The cold calculation? Jessica's heartbreak wasn't just about losing Meghan. It was about realizing what the friendship had truly been. She started to question every moment. Every hug. Every brunch. Every late-night call. Was any of it real? Or had Meghan been playing a role the entire time? And here's the kicker. Jessica wasn't alone in this realization. Others began to notice the same pattern. Childhood friends. Ex-partners. Colleagues. People who had once been close to Meghan, only to find themselves discarded the second they no longer served her story. It was a pattern of betrayal. Jessica's heartbreak, then, became symbolic. She wasn't just mourning her own friendship. She was exposing the way Meghan treated people across the board. Meghan didn't just break one bond. She broke many. And Jessica's story was proof. But Jessica's heartbreak had another layer. Her children. Remember, they played central roles in Meghan's wedding. They walked down the aisle, smiled for the cameras, carried the weight of history on their little shoulders. They believed Annie Meghan loved them. And then, nothing. No more visits. No more calls. No more connection. Imagine explaining to your kids why their auntie, the Duchess they once adored, no longer wanted them in her life. That's betrayal not just of a friend, but of an entire family. The emotional fallout was enormous. Jessica withdrew from the spotlight. She retreated into private life, licking her wounds, trying to rebuild. But the scar remained. And the whispers wouldn't stop. Everywhere she went, people asked, "What happened between you and Meghan?" The pain wasn't private anymore. It was public humiliation, relived with every question. And still, Meghan never spoke, never clarified, never apologized. She didn't just abandon Jessica, she erased her. Here's the irony. Meghan's brand is built on loyalty, empowerment, authenticity. Yet her treatment of Jessica was the exact opposite. And Jessica's heartbreak became the evidence. The receipts. The contradiction Meghan couldn't explain away. But heartbreak doesn't always stay quiet. Over time, Jessica's silence cracked. The grief transformed into something else: anger, disillusionment, the need to speak. Because silence protects the powerful. And Jessica realized she had been protecting Meghan long after Meghan had stopped protecting her. And that's when things got dangerous. Because Jessica didn't just have her own story, she had knowledge. Intimate, behind-the-scenes knowledge of Meghan's climb. Knowledge that could dismantle the narrative Meghan had built. The heartbreak turned to fire. The fire turned to words. And once Jessica began to speak, Meghan's carefully constructed image started to crumble. Because what came next wasn't just one woman's heartbreak. It was the exposure of a pattern that reached far beyond a single friendship. And the world was about to see Meghan in a way it never had before. She wasn't the first. That's the chilling truth Jessica Mulroney came to realize. And it's what makes her story hit even harder. Meghan Markle's cold silence, her calculated erasure, her transactional loyalty, none of it was new. This wasn't an isolated heartbreak. It was a pattern that stretched back years, across continents, across every stage of Meghan's life. And once you start connecting the dots, the picture that emerges is damning. Let's start with Nanaki Pretty, Meghan's childhood best friend. They grew up together, shared secrets, shared dreams. Nanaki was by Meghan's side through school, through heartbreak, through the early days of Hollywood hustle. She was even Meghan's maid of honor at her first wedding to Trevor Engelson. That's how close they were. And yet, when Meghan's star began to rise, Nanaki was gone. Cut off. Erased. Sound familiar? Nanaki herself later spoke out, painting a picture eerily similar to Jessica's. She described Meghan as calculated, someone who knew exactly what she wanted and wasn't afraid to leave people behind to get it. Her words echoed with the same betrayal Jessica now voices. Meghan uses people for what they can offer, and when they're no longer useful, she discards them. Then there's Trevor Engelson, Meghan's first husband, a Hollywood producer. He supported her, believed in her, backed her career. They built a life together in Los Angeles. But once Meghan landed her role on Suits in Toronto, the cracks appeared. Long distance strained the marriage, yes, but what stung was the way it ended. Reports say Meghan sent back her wedding ring by mail. By mail. A clean, cold break. No conversation. No closure. Just a final act of detachment. The echoes of Jessica's silence are unmistakable. And it didn't stop there. Colleagues from Suits whispered similar sentiments. At first, Meghan was warm, approachable, eager to make friends. But as her profile grew, she began to separate herself. She distanced from castmates, focusing on bigger ambitions, bigger stages. By the time she was dating Prince Harry, many of those friendships had withered away. Another layer of abandonment. Another set of people left behind. Even inside the palace, the pattern repeated. Royal aides, often described in the press as broken, spoke of Meghan's demanding nature, her lack of loyalty, her willingness to discard staff once they had served their purpose. What Jessica describes in friendship, palace insiders describe in work relationships. The same strategy, the same coldness. And what about her family? Meghan's father, Thomas Markle. Her half-sister, Samantha. Her half-brother, Thomas Jr. Now, it's true, those relationships are messy, complicated. But here's the common thread. Once conflict arose, once Meghan no longer needed them, she severed ties completely. Silence. Distance. Erasure. See the pattern now? It's not just Jessica. It's not just Nanaki. It's not just Trevor. It's everyone. Friends. Partners. Family. Staff. Meghan's loyalty seems to last only as long as people are useful to her climb. And that's why Jessica's story stings so much. Because she wasn't naive. She saw the warning signs. She knew Meghan had left others behind. But she believed she was different. She believed their bond was stronger, deeper, unbreakable. She was wrong. And that realization broke her. Because if Meghan could do it to childhood friends, to ex-husbands, to colleagues, to family, why did Jessica think she would be the exception? It's a brutal truth. Meghan doesn't seem to keep people. She keeps opportunities. Once the opportunity is gone, so is the person. And this pattern matters. Because it raises the ultimate question. Who is Meghan Markle, really? Is she the warm, compassionate humanitarian she sells to the world? Or is she the cold, calculated social climber her former friends describe? The contradictions are staggering. Meghan preaches empowerment, yet leaves wreckage in her wake. She talks about loyalty, yet discards those closest to her. She demands authenticity, yet crafts her life like a stage play. And Jessica, by speaking out, forces us to confront this contradiction head-on. Because if Meghan treated her this way, her supposed best friend, her supposed sister, what does that say about the rest of her relationships? With Harry, with Hollywood, with the world stage she now occupies. Ask yourself, when every friendship ends the same way, is it coincidence? Or is it character? Jessica's heartbreak was personal, yes, but it's also part of a larger mosaic. A mosaic of betrayal, ambition, and cold calculation. One where the pattern is undeniable, and the ending is always the same: silence. But Jessica wasn't content to be just another erased name in Meghan's past. No, she decided to speak. And once she did, the carefully built facade of Meghan's perfect persona began to crack. Because what came next wasn't just about Meghan's past. It was about exposing the machinery behind her entire image, the media mirage that had fooled the world. And when that curtain was pulled back, no one saw it coming. It was all smoke and mirrors. That's the revelation that hits hardest once you peel back the glossy Instagram feeds, the glowing magazine profiles, and the perfectly curated appearances. Meghan Markle didn't just benefit from luck or timing. Her entire rise was engineered. Behind the curtain, there was a mirage, a media illusion. And Jessica Mulroney wasn't just a bystander to that illusion. She was a key architect. Think about Meghan's public image in those early days. The world saw her as polished, sophisticated, effortlessly stylish. She wasn't just another actress playing a paralegal on Suits. She was suddenly being profiled as a woman of taste, a rising star, someone who exuded the aura of someone destined for bigger things. But here's the truth: that glow wasn't organic. It was designed. And Jessica was the designer. Jessica was deeply embedded in Canada's fashion scene. She had connections to designers, PR teams, editors. Her word carried weight. If Jessica vouched for you, doors opened. And that's exactly what she did for Meghan. Suddenly Meghan had access to clothing from elite designers. Suddenly her outfits were catching the eye of fashion journalists. Suddenly she was appearing on best-dressed lists that she hadn't been on before. But here's the irony. The media treated Meghan's rise as though it was her own making. Effortless, they called it. Self-made. The very narrative Meghan leaned on when she later sold herself as a woman who built her brand from scratch. But behind the scenes, Jessica was making the calls. Jessica was the one convincing designers to lend dresses. Jessica was the one helping style Meghan's photo shoots. Jessica was the one elevating her friend into a spotlight that otherwise would have stayed dim. And Meghan never corrected the record. She let the world believe it was all her. That she had naturally blossomed into this icon of elegance and humanitarian chic. She never once stepped aside to say, Jessica made this possible. No, she absorbed the credit. That's the mirage. Ask yourself, how often do we see celebrities praised for being effortless, when in reality, every detail is orchestrated? Meghan's entire rise before Harry was built this way. Carefully staged, carefully styled, carefully presented. The Meghan the world saw wasn't the Meghan behind closed doors. It was the version of Meghan Jessica helped construct. And then came the real twist. Once Meghan entered the royal sphere, that mirage became even more dangerous. Because the palace had its own machinery, press officers, stylists, advisors. Suddenly Jessica wasn't the only architect. Meghan was now drawing on two systems: the old friends who helped her build her brand, and the royal institution shaping her into a duchess. But here's where it turns cold. Meghan didn't need both. She chose the palace machine over Jessica. She stepped fully into the media mirage and left the friend who helped create it standing in the shadows. Think about the irony. Jessica created the illusion that made Meghan royal ready, only to be erased once Meghan had the crown's machinery at her disposal. It's like a magician discarding the assistant once the trick is perfected. And this wasn't just a betrayal of friendship. It was a betrayal of truth. Meghan had built her reputation as authentic, real, a woman unafraid to speak her mind. But the reality? Her authenticity was staged. Her effortless elegance was styled. Her humanitarian image was coached. Nothing was as organic as it seemed. Jessica's voice now exposes this contradiction. She points out the invisible labor she gave to Meghan's rise. The hours spent building the persona, the connections leveraged, The credibility sacrificed. And for what? To be cut out of the story once the role was complete. This is the part that twists the knife. Meghan has spent years presenting herself as self-made, as a woman who broke barriers alone, as someone who owes nothing to anyone. But Jessica's story cracks that foundation. It reminds the world that Meghan didn't climb alone. She had help. She had allies. And she discarded them. And this is why the media mirage matters. Because if Meghan's rise was orchestrated from the beginning, then her entire brand is questionable. The speeches, the activism, the public image. How much of it is heartfelt, and how much of it is performance? That's the uncomfortable truth Jessica forces us to confront. Meghan is not just a woman who betrayed a friend. She is a woman who built an empire of perception, borrowing the credibility of others until she no longer needed them, and then cutting them loose. But here's the cliffhanger. The wedding. Oh, the wedding. The crown jewel of the mirage. The day the entire world watched Meghan Markle step into history. Jessica was there. Her children were there. On the surface, it looked like the ultimate celebration of their friendship. But behind the scenes, it was something very different. Because when you peel back the layers of that day, you find another betrayal hiding in plain sight. And what Jessica learned about her role in the royal wedding would leave her shaken forever. It looked like a fairy tale. The royal wedding of Prince Harry and Meghan Markle on May 19, 2018, was broadcast to millions around the world. The dress, the flowers, the music, the pageantry. Every detail was examined, every moment immortalized. And standing close to the center of it all was Jessica Mulroney. Her children were page boy and bridesmaids. She was seen arriving in Windsor, elegant and glowing, the image of a best friend elevated to near-family status. To the outside world, it looked like Meghan had rewarded her closest ally with a front-row seat in history. But here's the chilling truth Jessica would later realize. Her presence wasn't loyalty. It was optics. Let's rewind. Jessica had poured herself into Meghan's preparation for that day. She had been heavily involved in styling choices, helping Meghan project an image of both modern chic and timeless tradition. From veil length to designer considerations, insiders whispered that Jessica's advice was everywhere. In private, Meghan leaned on her. In public, Meghan minimized her role. The irony? Meghan's team presented her as a self-sufficient bride, managing her own vision with minimal help, a woman in full control of her image. But behind closed doors, it was Jessica who had been calling designers, weighing in on fabrics, smoothing over tensions. Just like before, Jessica's fingerprints were all over the transformation. But her name was erased from the narrative. And then came the children. Jessica's twins, John and Brian, stole the show as page boys, struggling with Meghan's veil, their expressions immortalized in photos that went viral across the globe. Her daughter, Ivy, walked behind Meghan as a bridesmaid, her face the picture of innocence. The Mulroney children weren't just participants. They became icons of the day. Without them, some of the most memorable images of the wedding wouldn't exist. To Jessica, it felt like cement. A bond for life. A friendship validated not just in private, but in front of the entire world. She believed this was proof she and Meghan were inseparable, forever sisters. But to Meghan, it was something colder. The Mulroney children were props, perfectly placed pieces in a royal performance. They added charm, relatability, a touch of family warmth. And once their role was fulfilled, once the optics were captured, their usefulness ended. Ask yourself, was Jessica's presence that day truly about loyalty, or was it about staging? Was Meghan rewarding a best friend, or was she ensuring the most photogenic, media-ready wedding possible? Here's where it cuts deepest. After the wedding, Jessica expected gratitude. She expected acknowledgement, closeness, loyalty. What she got instead was distance. The very event she thought would bind her to Meghan forever became the beginning of her erasure. Meghan had crossed into a new world, a higher stage. And Jessica? She was no longer essential. Think about the cruelty of that. To invite someone into the most public moment of your life, to use their children in history-making images, only to discard them after. It wasn't just a betrayal of friendship. It was exploitation, wrapped in flowers and tiaras. And Jessica began to notice it almost immediately. After the honeymoon period, the texts slowed. The calls stopped. Meghan was busier, more distant. Jessica was no longer needed. The closeness of Windsor faded into silence. The woman who had been integral to Meghan's preparation was suddenly a ghost. This is the irony of the wedding. For Jessica, it was the pinnacle of their friendship. For Meghan, it was the curtain call. A final act. After the cameras shut off, so did the bond. And here's the twist. Meghan's narrative of the wedding erased Jessica's contributions entirely. The media credited Meghan for her unique vision, her modern touches, her personal flair. Jessica's involvement, her behind-the-scenes influence, vanished from the story. Meghan had successfully absorbed the credit, leaving Jessica invisible once again. But invisibility has a cost. Because Jessica didn't just lose her place in Meghan's life, she lost her place in history. When people talk about the wedding, they talk about Meghan's brilliance, Meghan's choices, Meghan's style. Rarely do they mention Jessica's role. Rarely do they credit her children. The erasure was complete. And that's the wound that festered. Jessica realized she had been used, not honored. Her family had been paraded before the world, only to be discarded once the cameras stopped rolling. But what came next would make the betrayal even sharper. Because while Jessica thought the wedding would secure her bond with Meghan forever, Meghan was already planning her next transformation, one that would leave Jessica further behind than ever. Because when Meghan turned her gaze from Windsor to Hollywood, Jessica discovered she was truly expendable. Hollywood, California, a sprawling Montecito mansion, sun-drenched and dripping with luxury. When Meghan Markle and Prince Harry stepped away from royal life in 2020, the world gasped, but Meghan wasn't gasping. She was smiling. She had finally arrived where she wanted to be, on the world stage, outside the control of the monarchy, free to carve her own destiny. But there was a catch. To play at that level, to stand shoulder to shoulder with Hollywood elites and Silicon Valley moguls, Meghan no longer needed Jessica Mulroney. She needed Oprah. She needed Tyler Perry. She needed Netflix. And once again, the pattern repeated. The friend who had carried her this far was left in the dust. Let's look at the shift. In Toronto, Jessica was the queenmaker. Meghan leaned on her for image, access, polish. In Windsor, Jessica was a symbol of loyalty, the woman whose children walked Meghan down the aisle. But in California, Jessica became irrelevant. Meghan's new circle was shinier, richer, and more powerful. Gone were the Toronto luncheons. In were Hollywood dinners. Gone were Canadian fashion brands. In were billion-dollar streaming deals. Meghan had traded in the old for the new, and Jessica didn't fit the aesthetic anymore. And here's the twist. Meghan didn't just move on. She distanced herself deliberately. In California, image was currency. Every association mattered. And Jessica, still reeling from her public scandal, wasn't an asset. She was a liability. Meghan's narrative of social justice warrior, modern-day princess, global humanitarian, couldn't withstand ties to someone painted in the press as privileged, tone-deaf, even toxic. So Meghan did what she had always done. She erased her. Ask yourself, was this simple self-preservation, or was it betrayal? Is it loyalty to yourself to cut off a friend who damages your image? Or is it cold calculation to discard them when they're no longer useful? Jessica felt the answer in her bones. She had been replaced. Replaced by Hollywood's elite. Replaced by Meghan's PR team. Replaced by the glitz of California's new friendships, celebrity activists, media powerhouses, A-list producers. Meghan's new life had no room for the woman who had once built her old one. And here's the irony. Meghan, who once clung to Jessica's network for validation, now pretended she had never needed it at all. In interviews, in documentaries, in speeches, Meghan painted her rise as the story of a woman who fought her way up alone. Self-made. Independent. No mention of the stylist friend in Toronto. No acknowledgement of the doors Jessica opened. No gratitude for the years of loyalty. It was as if Jessica never existed. But the silence wasn't neutral, it was strategic. By erasing Jessica, Meghan protected herself. She controlled the narrative. She made herself the architect of her own destiny, rather than the beneficiary of someone else's influence. And in Hollywood, where image is everything, that narrative mattered more than friendship. Meanwhile, Jessica watched from the sidelines. She saw Meghan draped across magazine covers, sitting down with Oprah, launching her Netflix empire. She saw the woman she once called her sister presenting a brand so glossy it blinded the world. And she knew the truth. She knew the scaffolding Meghan was standing on had been built, in part, with her own hands. That truth burned. Because Hollywood wasn't just Meghan's next step. It was the confirmation that Jessica had been nothing more than a rung on the ladder. Let's pause and ask directly. How many of us have seen this play out on a smaller scale? A friend gets a promotion, a new partner, a better social circle, and suddenly, you're forgotten. Now magnify that by 1,000. That's what Jessica experienced. And what made it worse? Meghan didn't just leave Jessica behind. She reinvented herself entirely, as though the years in Toronto had never happened. The woman who once clung to Canadian connections now styled herself as a global figure, too important, too polished, too untouchable to ever look back. Jessica was left with the silence. But silence breeds resentment, and resentment eventually finds its voice. Because Jessica wasn't just discarded. She was humiliated. Publicly, she was made to look irrelevant, while Meghan soared higher than ever. And in that humiliation, the heartbreak curdled into something sharper, anger. And anger has a way of spilling over.